Hey, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. I hope you're well and welcome back to another SuperCoach Strategy Roundtable where we help you navigate your way through the remaining weeks, trades and moves you're considering in your SuperCoach side. 3 bye rounds are down. 1 is left to go, which means it is the last week after what's felt like an eternity of best 18s in 2024. But it's the last time you're going to see the dreaded blue dots. It's the last time you can make as many as 4 trades this week, should you have any boosts left. And I don't know too many coaches in the community that do, but there's definitely going to be some that absolutely have some boosts. Joining me on this SuperCoach Strategy podcast is a man that, well, for the Coaches Panel listeners anyway, got to very much love his fine work in the preseason. He was a special guest on the 50 Most Relevant, brought some great insights around Rowan Marshall. If you're a part of the Dr. SuperCoach community, you know this man for the great captaincy advice he gives, great statistical analysis on a bunch of different players. He's a regular part of that community. Pig mentality, mate, nice to have you back on the podcast. And a fascinating week of trades ahead for us here in SuperCoach.
Thanks very much, MJ. It is nice to be back on the Coaches Panel and talking to you. It's always really nice and easy and organic. You've got a good way of just welcoming anyone in, a great part of this podcast. So I'm really happy to be here. The last bye rounds, I think, are really important ones because people are kind of finishing their teams potentially now, or they're waiting a week and then finishing in the next week. So that'll be an interesting discussion. But yeah, I'm keen to see no more blue dots on my field.
I'm not going to miss them.
And on that, just recommending the captaincies when you've only got 6 of the 12 to play for it to choose from, and then there's no Richmond or St Kilda this week to target. I've got to do more research.
Oh, mate. Well, you know, the good news is those that are looking at their rank and going, look, I'm doing okay this year. We say it every year, but it is this interesting point of the season where while we do have a good handle on where our rank is, it's probably really only post round 16 where we'll get an element of truth about where our teams truly sit, what our rank almost accurately is. I know there's the elements of who's got trades left and a bunch of other variables, but while we might be sitting pretty looking at our rank going, geez, I'm in a good space here for SuperCoach, there is a lot of variables the next fortnight could throw, injuries, suspensions aside, that could really see some ranking shiftings given we've got so many relevant premiums out this week.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a lot of people say it, but you've got to kind of view the 4 buys as a whole. Like if you get really upset or really happy about a rank rise or fall in one buy, you might be a little bit disappointed in another one because you've stacked that one. But so it's really important to look at, I guess, 2 things, your rank coming in and then your rank coming out. Hopefully that's improved. But kind of your team coming in and team coming out, you should have. I'm not a fan of kind of doing the sideways premium switches too much because I still want my trades to be upgrading the team. And my view is always to come out of this buys full primo, 22 primos on field, no rookies anywhere near the ground.
Yeah, no, you definitely, this should hopefully, barring some injuries or some coverage like Jai Simpkin owners and traders into might have needed, or some depth you're flexing as we get to the final few months of the year. This should hopefully be the last week that there's a cash cow or a rookie on your field that you're going, please get a 70, please get a 70 in your best and ideal situation. And maybe that's where we start at the moment. Traditional mindset of SuperCoach would be you're exiting this mid-season buys and basically have a completed side. Look, maybe there's a trade maximum of 2 to go and you're out of cash cows on field. With the boosts that we've had introduced over the past few seasons and the additional kind of 2 things, 1, trades, and 2, an appetite to be aggressive with how we trade, coaches have certainly got to this point of the season, and most coaches ranked highly, if not now, certainly after this week. Single digits is the amount of trades they're going to be sitting with left to use in 2024. So I guess my first up question for you, Pig Mentality, is once our teams are quote unquote complete, we may never truly be complete, but filled with premiums that we're happy to have on field, how many trades should we be stashing away for the inevitable injuries and players just being put out to pasture as we get now to the final few months of the SuperCoach season?
It is a tough one because it can be different year to year, I think. But we have to remember we still have 10 weeks left from now.
Yeah.
And when this bye's done, we still have 9 weeks left. So you want a few. I think I'd be okay with five for injuries for the final 9 rounds. I'm personally going to be down to 4. And I'm a little bit nervous about that, but I've structured my team where I've got DPP everywhere that I could hopefully make some swings and cover. So maybe I'm okay with 4 if you've got that. I've seen guys talking about, spending another trade to get the better premium, but then they're down to 3 trades. Yeah. 3 trades in for 10 rounds makes me really nervous.
Oh, yeah.
But, there'll be teams that have 8 or 7 left, and that could be your green light to maybe use those 2 as sideways. Like maybe you've still got a Stewart or a McRae that you're not happy with. Maybe that's your green light. Or maybe you save them and then for a 2-week injury, let's say a popular player like Nick Dacos gets a 2-week injury, most people will be holding. Maybe that's those where you use those trades to get a leg up. There's a few different ways to play it.
And there it is, this point of the year with SuperCoach, as trades do start to diminish and people's bench hygiene or how they've built depth, or as you've mentioned in your team, how you've utilized DPP with your tactical maneuvers. You can always make up pretty easily 100 up to 200 points with captaincies and some unique calls. But all of a sudden, when injuries to popular guys start to hit, that's where we can see some multiple 100-point swings in SuperCoach. That's one of the things I like about this game too, is it's not everybody owns the same people and we're all trading every single week at the same trade cadence. This is where the strategy piece starts to come in to the game in a whole new level. It's there all year, but when and where and how to value a trade. I'm curious on that. You've mentioned building DPP as a way of covering, valuing and holding onto trades. Where do you sit on the idea of a 23rd premium, for example? So some people were trading into, with a little bit of bad luck, a Jai Simpkin last week, or pushing a Tom Powell to the bench, or looking at a Connor Rozee at an M9, like these players that they've probably got no real intent to put on field, but just building depth from matchups and hopefully saving a trade. Do you have a take on whether or not a 23rd premium is a viable play?
Yeah, I've got an opinion. It seems like every week on the Dr. Supercoach podcast, Pistol and I discuss this, and we've got different views on it. Mine is that I am someone who likes to have all my points and all my cash on field, working for me on field if possible. I know Pistol is a bit more of a fan of, if it's a really high spike score upside guy, that's all right to have as a 23rd premium. Say like you're able to push Tom Green or maybe even Connor Rozee to the bench, and you can kind of loop and try and get a 130 out of him. The guys like Tom Powell and Jai Simpkin, I don't see them with that ceiling. I think they're just a bit of a waste of space. Not waste of space, that's wrong. A waste of money. Like if you could downgrade them to even a 102 guy, you free up so much money that could be making points on your field. So I'm always a fan of having all your money working for you on field coming home. But I can definitely see the logic if it's a spike type guy, a high ceiling guy.
So talk to me about these 102K guys. Now, this is the basement of basement players we have available to us. A lot of coaches, not all, but a lot of coaches already have a basement option at R3. I know some might have moved into a Kruger of late, but have historically through the season looked at a Heath, a Livingston, a Barnett, amongst others that have been a ruck forward predominant loophole that sat through there. But trading away a position, whether it be an M8, an M10, a D8, an F8, to maximize cash for on-field upgrades. 2 months still of SuperCoach and fantasy footy to go is a long time. Is it too early to throw away one of these positions for a quote-unquote dead basement cash cow that really isn't likely to play? We could get lucky and jag one, but what's your take on throwing a spot for a 102 guy?
I'm all right with it now, as long as you've still got other players playing on that bench. So if, let's say it's a midfield and you get a 102 guy and you take K guy in your midfield, I'm okay with them not playing if, say, you've got like a Jai Clark and a Billy Dowling that are playing. So I still want cover on every line if possible. But I'm kind of okay with just having one cover and then one being a thrown spot. I guess the thing with these guys, anyone you're trading in now, you're not really trading out.
Ideally, no.
A, you don't have enough trades, and B, they're not going to make that much money in time to be worth anything to you. So I am okay with going right down to maximize your cash, especially, if it's getting a 130k guy that's playing versus 102k guy that's not. If that's the difference between getting the premium you want and missing and having to settle for a lesser premium, I'm definitely okay with it. But like I said, I definitely want a playing bench cover on each line. I don't want to throw both defender spots, for example.
No, 100%. Well, that's where you're elevating that risk profile in your SuperCoach side, isn't it? And there's a multitude of layer of what a risk is and isn't, but absolutely throwing positions. Ask Jai Simpkin traders that got stuck, and in that hour of time, just life happened. Yeah. Man, if they were running some coverage in a best 22 style setup, not a best 18, man, that's a donut and really does make it hard to make some catch-ups from there. I'm interested.
Actually,
please.
Before we go on, there is a 102 guy that just got named to debut this week about an hour ago. Kynan Brown for Melbourne, and he's also got a really nice midfield and forward swing, which I was already this week. My plans involved trading in a 102k mid forward dead rookie. I was thinking maybe Geordie Payne or someone that could potentially get a game if I'm lucky. Yeah. Now Kynan Brown's popped up. He could be a nice little one, and he could also swing with if you've got Billy Dowling or if you're keeping Joel Frazier or someone like that.
Revel,
he could be there to swing between those positions as well. So he is one that I'm going to be trading him in. And I think a lot of people could look at that.
Yeah, I'm glad. I was about to ask if there was a 102 guy you got your eye on who we should look at. And you're right. The Melbourne Footy Club have absolutely gifted us one at the moment. We might get some others as well, but he's definitely the one that's going to play this week that sits in that space. Again, for people that don't have a Billy Dowling, he's not a basement guy, but he's on the bubble for us after the Crows by coming back through there. If you're really desperate, you've got a Kruger sitting there. I think he's got a reasonable job security, but ideally these aren't players that beyond this week you're looking to put on field. It's rather the release of cash they provide for you. I think there's this mantra in SuperCoach, I'm sure it's the same in the other formats of fantasy football as well, is ultimately I think we all want the best players and the best scorers for as long as we can. And in a week's time, everybody's on a level playing field. Everybody's playing, at least in terms of games available, the same level of cadence of opportunity. Whereas up until the end of this week, some teams have had 2 buys. Up until now, teams like the Crows, for example, they've been running, or the Bulldogs have been running every single week. A Melbourne or a Sydney have had 2. So it's not at a disadvantage in any means, but tactically it changes our trading rhythms of who we get into and when. And so I'm curious, I think most of us would suggest in the SuperCoach community, in a forward line that has been okay for us this year, certainly not what 2023 delivered for us, but it's been okay this year. We'd look at a player like an Isaac Ranken and go, man, if he's fit, he's a top 6 forward from now to the rest of the year. I think most people would be comfortable with that suggestion. But he's not playing this week with the Crows on the bye. And so with coaches trying to hit what you've alluded to right at the top of the podcast, Pig Mentality, which is hoping to come out of the bye with a completed side, let alone on that first week off the bye making a trade, it does have coaches looking at players such as a Charlie Kerno this week, who's fine, like sitting around that 90 sort of range, which is okay for us. Whereas an Isaac Ranken, I think we would all think is closer to the triple digits of an average. So my question is this: should we just take the extra week of scoring and hope that that balances out a loss of potentially 5 to 10 points per game? Or do we wait the week and believe that the quote unquote better premium gets us there? I know you could say this for a lot of others, but using kind of Kerno and Ranken as the template for the conversation, what's your take on get the best you can get now and bank the extra week of scores, or take the best option and hope that over the remaining 8 to 9 weeks they catch up to them?
Yeah, I think this really depends a lot on how many players you have playing this week. So if you have, say, 20 or 21 playing this week, you might not need Kerno. You might not need his score. There might be other players that are kind of doing a similar thing. But there are a lot of coaches who will have 17 or 18 this week and potentially can't afford the Ranken donut and will need to get Kerno. So that's one way to look at it. I guess with these two as well, there's a huge price difference. So that would impact your trading. But let's take the price out of it and just talk about points. I probably think in this particular example, 10 rounds of Kerno probably equals 9 rounds of Rankin.
Okay.
So I'm probably all right. I'd be happy to get Kerno just because of that price difference. And also on Kerno and Mackay, Carlton have the easiest run coming home for the next 10 rounds for key forwards.
Wow.
By a long way. So they've got some really nice matchups. Like I'm just looking at it now. Richmond, Bulldogs, North, Hawthorn, West Coast, St Kilda, all quite nice matchups coming home. So
yeah,
I've actually been eyeing off these Carlton key forwards for weeks, like waiting for their bye, because they had a really, really tough run coming into their bye. And so the fact they were still averaging 90s is quite great. I think they could. Kerno's going to be pushing for a third Coleman medal in a row. I wouldn't be surprised if he pushes close to 100 average and goes close to Rankin.
Yeah.
Having said that, I do think Rankin will average more, but I think 1 week of Kerno is better than 1 week extra of Kerno is better. And I guess you could say the same thing, like in the defense, like people will be looking at, I don't know, do you get a Yeo or a Whitfield or a Sheasel versus Jack Sinclair, who I think is going to come home really strong. I think he's a great pick, but he doesn't play this week.
Yeah, it's a good point. And the cash element's equally as important too, because, that 100K give or take of the Kerno and Rankin difference, that could be significant for what you put on top of a Jack Steele if you're not happy with his last 5 weeks and wanting to pivot off that, or looking to make that upgrade off, if you're worried about Alex Sexton not getting named this week or something like that, if you're an owner. So it's not just the 1-for-1 Kerno versus Rankin. It's Kerno and 100 versus this scenario. So I think you've broken that down beautifully for us.
It could even be
please.
It could even be a matter of, I guess, if you're doing 2 upgrades, like if you go Rankin, that's great, but then you have to settle for maybe a Clary. But if you go Kerno, then you could, get up to a Sarong kind of thing is potentially the difference as well. So you've got to think, if it's your final trade, that's different. But if you've still got 2 to do, you've got to think about the money kind of as a whole.
Yeah, it's some really good advice. So I reckon we could probably talk about 20 players to be fair, but there's a couple I want to talk you through. And then there's a couple I know you've brought to the table you want to introduce for us. I know at the Dr. Supercoach podcast, you've been banging the jungle drums around one particular player, especially in the ruck line, in Brodie Grundy. Just now over 600,000, going at 131 over his last 3, seasonal average of 116. I know a bunch of the community didn't start him and went Gawn and Cherry, or Gawn and another premium ruck. Some started him and jumped out at the bye, hoping to turn him into a Marshall, or maybe jumped into a Sweet. And let's not mention his name again, because those super coaches that did that are feeling a little bit triggered by mentioning him, maybe still have him at R3. It's not a for everyone move, because again, a lot of people have gone plus something else based on the ownership potential. But what are you seeing about Brody Grundy for those that are looking to trade into a ruck or jump off a Marshall or an English at their buy? It's unique, I know, but it's definitely a play. As you mentioned, the extra week of scoring and the cash saved. Yeah. What's your take on Brody Grundy as a trade in for us from this week?
I still think he's probably the best ruck trade-in target. Obviously, Max is if you don't have Max, but let's pretend people have Max. I think Grundy's R2 for the rest of the year. I did a big deep dive 2 weeks ago when Grundy was coming off his bye, and I was very pro Grundy over. That was at the point where people, were getting off Sweet or getting off Marshall. They needed their R2. I was in the get Grundy over English and Marshall camp. That hasn't changed. I mean, Grundy's just put 2 150s back to back on our heads. So
it's incredible.
You're not getting those scores, and that especially that Geelong matchup, that was one I targeted. But against GWS this week, I think he's going to have a field day. Then he has Marshall soon. I looked at the fixture. He still has a much easier run than the other guys coming home. So even if they were to play the same amount of games, I would probably say he could nearly match them. So just looking at DFS, Sydney now have the 6th easiest run for matchup for ruckman coming home, whereas Bulldogs and St Kilda are down in like the bottom third in terms of hardness. So Marshall and English have a harder run. Marshall has a really nice SuperCoach finals fixture. If anyone is playing leagues and wants a ruckman for finals, I think Marshall's a great player. But if you're playing for overall, like a lot of us are, I still think Brody Grundy outscores those boys for the rest of the year. And also he has an extra game. So I'm very, very confident he outscores them in total points. So yeah, I'm a big Brody Grundy fan. I've been, like you said, banging his drums for 2 weeks, which is really funny because I started with him and then got really annoyed and moved him on after 2 or 3 weeks. And now I'm regretting that so much. But I think I paid up 700K for a Tim English and now he's lost 150. So that was a sliding doors moment that didn't go well. But I'm okay to admit when I'm wrong and say, no, Brody Grundy, I think, is the R2 you still want.
Yeah, I like it. What's your take on jumping off of an English or a Marshall, who, again, have been okay for us this year, but both have given us probably more basement scoring games in SuperCoach than not only last year, but certainly a bit more volatile than what we'd hoped. Are you comfortable, or is it very trade in the bank dependent on whether or not you're doing it? What's your thoughts about clearing that sort of a trade move off?
Yeah, I think you'd have to have quite a few trades in the bank. That's not really something I'd really look at. I think English and Marshall, they have had some bad scores, you're right, but I think they still average like that 110, 115 coming home. Yeah. Whereas some of the midfielders you might be looking at trading, I don't think you could say the same thing for, like a Tom Green, for example. So I think people should have bigger issues. If for some reason you don't, I mean, it's not a horrible move because I think Grundy does put more total points on them. I'm just not certain it's necessarily worth a. And English, after his bye, he does have a good run. He's got some nice teams as well. So I'm still confident. But yeah, if I was trading in an R2 now, it would be Brody Grundy.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with that. And people that have got a Jackson at R2, whether or not it's the versatility to get you through, or it was your way of covering Jordan Sweet absence, or you started him at the start of the year when Sean Darcy was out and he's found his way to just maintain his spot in your side. I think there's still a good portion of the community looking at what they do at R2, whether or not it's Max as the gap or Max is the accompaniment for it. And you right, we are getting to this place where we don't value our trades differently. I think we always have had a value on them, but the scarcity or the coming scarcity of it means, man, 6-8 weeks ago to gain 200 points over a fortnight, we probably pulled the trigger on a trade. Now, okay, Grundy might be in total 200 points more advanced than what an English does, but could that trade activated in 6 weeks' time actually net you 500 points because you're not banking the Jai Clark to cover you the last month of the year at M8, or Friese's now on field for 3 weeks while you're waiting for Flanders. I'm just picking names. I'm not putting curses on players. But this is where the value of holding on to these trades that you mentioned right at the top of the podcast episode. Talk to me about Jordan Ridley. Only played for 3 weeks so far this year. Spent a little bit of time, more than a little bit of time, injured. Already had a bit of a price movement as a result of 3 really strong weeks. So that 162 and then back-to-back 110 plus scores after that. He's not cheap. He's pushing that 570K marker, but he does hit 2 pretty important indicators that super coaches are looking for in the back half of the year. One is ceiling. He's absolutely got it. The second thing is he sits in that unique space for us while we're trying to create a level of separation from the pack, whether we're leagues or rankings focused. We are trying to, where can we kind of move away from the pack a little bit with some right differentiation. And we've seen over a number of years in SuperCoach, when Ridley's not having to only lock down, and with Mackay in the side, that's clearly the case. He's free to intercept. He's taking kick-ins. You put his intercept marking, the intercept possessions, where and how he scores inside D50, let alone what he does with kick-ins. It feels like a gift. Or is there better options at a cheaper price? What's your take on Jordan Ridley?
I really, really like Jordan Ridley. I am a Bombers fan, so I love watching him play.
All right, next question.
So you can decide whether there's some bias or not. But, well, I don't own him in SuperCoach, and I'm not going to be able to this year, which is sad for me. But Bombers have an incredible run coming home for defenders. They've got the second easiest matchup running home for wingers and attacking defenders. So that's the guys that push out a D50, run up, kick it into 50. That Jordan does a little bit of that. That's potentially more like the Mason Redmonds and the Nick Martins. But they've also got the second easiest run home for designated kickers. So that's the guys that take kickouts, the guys who are on the switch and kind of, Luke Ryan, think of that kind of guy. And that's what Jordan Ridley plays. And he also gets a lot of intercept marks. So Bombers have an incredible run home for defenders. So I think Jordan Ridley is going to come home really strong just because of the teams he's going to face. I don't think he's going to, that 160 against Richmond, that's the easiest matchup a defender can ever get. So I'm not expecting that again. Although he does play St Kilda in round 20. So there could be that one.
Nice finals push, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I think he's a great pick. I'm not sure he's a 115 kind of defenders. Not many are. But between the 105 and 110, I'm pretty comfortable saying that.
Yeah.
He is injury prone. This isn't his first injury. He's had quite a few injuries in his career. That's always a risk, but
sure.
A lot of the players are injury risks this time of year. So really, really like him. Whether I would buy him over, say, an Elliot Yeo for 60K less, I'm not sure. I would probably do Yeo. But yeah, Jordan Ridley, still a bit of a point of difference. Quite a few people jumped on him, but it wasn't that big of a percentage. So yeah, really great option. I think you'd be really happy with him in your defense.
You mentioned Elliot Yeo, about 50K cheaper. Going at basically it's a decimal point away from a 108 for the year. It was a brilliant starting squad option. And rightfully so. The community fled off him at his injury. I think that was a right play, given there was some uncertainty about how many weeks it would be, and history would say players with poor injury history that he's had up until this year, safe to say, you kind of jump off on the first sign of injury. So I don't blame any super coacher that jumped off Elliot Yeo. That was absolutely right. But if there's anyone in the defensive line that, again, we talk about key important markers, which is fixture, role, ceiling, and ownership percentage. These are 4 really important variables for us, let alone the ability to have some positional fluidity about where you place him. Gosh, it's a fascinating play. It does feel a little counterintuitive, especially for coaches that didn't start him. I understand if you're scared off by injury and now you're looking at 515K basically going, geez, could I or should I do it? But you mentioned you'd feel more comfortable with Yeo. What makes you lean on Yeo a little bit more than Ridley? Granted, they both do have some injury history that makes you a bit concerned by it.
Money. Purely money is the reason I would go Yeo over Ridley. But I think that's also a fair point, because a lot of teams are a bit strapped for cash, and like we said before, if you're paying up for Ridley, you might not then be able to get the other premium you want. So I've had to do some trading and planning, and I got Yeo so that then I can afford who I wanted on the other side of it, which I think was Charlie Kerno and Luke Jackson to round out my team. So, and if I did Ridley, I wouldn't have been able to got both of them. I would have had to settle for, I'm not sure, Mackay maybe. So yeah, Yeo, purely for price. I mean, banking on relying on Elliot Yeo to play 10 more games is not something I'm very confident in.
Sure.
I do like that he has the DPP swing. So I've got a defender in my midfield. I think it might be Dacos or someone. So
Yep.
if Elliot Yeo goes down, I could swing him back and, rookies can cover, or I've even got Zach Fisher and to be able to swing him back. So there are options, but if you told me Yeo is going to play all the next 10 games, I'd be very pleasantly surprised.
Yeah.
So it's a risk. So you don't want to do it. If you're one of those teams going down to like 3 trades, I wouldn't try and go near Yeo. But like he's just an incredible scorer. Like he was going over 110 for a lot of the year before he got injured. He's playing inside mid West Coast. You hear I keep talking about the runs teams have coming home, but I think we're at that point of the year where you can actually really assess the fixture and trade people in based on a 10-game sample size is enough data to say they've got a good run. So
Yeah.
West Coast have a positive matchup. It's not it's not massive, but they've still got a pretty positive matchup for inside midfielders. So that should help him. I just think he's I just don't think there's many players that are 515k that could score 110.
Yeah.
And Elliot's the one that I've identified that probably could.
Yeah, or go on a 3 or 4 week tear of 130, which, again, you want him to play over it, the 10-week stretch, but we're not looking for guys like we were in March of this year where it's, can they give us 6 months of injury-free football? We're now looking at a 6 to 10-week move. And if you, as you've mentioned, you look at the next kind of month for Elliot Yeo, you look at the absences they have to some of their experienced players through the midfield, and you go, right, he's their best midfielder anyway, let alone with some other players missing from the side. The narrative of how you get yourself to an Elliot Yeo, it's easier than I think we probably give it credit for. Too many people, even maybe 3 minutes ago, went, boys, what are you talking about Elliot Yeo for? but the reality is, as you mentioned, barring his injury, 6 odd weeks ago, we were content to run the gauntlet with him on our field until the injury hit. And so, it's a risk profile elevation, undisputed in that, based on 1, he's already had an injury this year, and 2, his history over the last 3 or 4 years is unfortunately deplorable. But definitely, I think that's the beauty of this time of year. You should be still considering all the options, not just locking in your confirmation bias of who or what or how you should get. And it's to that point, if we stay in the defensive line, maybe for one last time, and then we'll move into the mids for 3 last players. I know you've got a question, at least about one player you want to ask me in the defensive line, but talk to me about Max Holmes from your perspective. Started as a midfield only, picked up DPP in the first allocation for SuperCoach all the way back now at the end of round 6. Speaking of that, we're not too far away from the final DPP allocations coming for the season. Defender mid now, up at nearly 580k, 575,200. The last 3, we've probably seen the best and the worst of Max in the last 3. A pair of 130s and then an 88. He is picking up more of an inside midfield role over the past 5 to 6 weeks, with the Geelong midfield of Guthrie, Dangerfield, and others being decimated through injuries. What's your take? He's been relatively consistent and kind of unheralded for us this year. I think he's been better than what all of us probably expected he would be, and definitely one of the form defenders of the past 3 to 5 weeks. But what's your take on Max as a trade in this week?
I really like Max Holmes as a player, and I think you're absolutely right that he's kind of flown under the radar. I think the last couple of weeks he probably picked up a little bit of a, pricked up some ears of coaches and then, oh, geez, that's someone who's going all right. But, there were coaches that owned him from the start and have been very, very happy. I do like him, and I was considering potentially him being my final defender trade in. But as I've kind of looked at the fixture, it's turned me off a little bit. And especially at that price, more expensive than Jordan Ridley, who I just said has the best fixture, a lot more expensive than Elliot Yeo, who, as we talked about, has the ceiling, but injury risk. Geelong actually have the hardest run in the entire league for that kind of wing as an attacking defender role that Max plays. So that gives me a little bit of hesitancy. He only has one green team in there, which is Hawthorn. And he's got Carlton and Essendon in the next 2, which are both red teams in that regard. So I don't really want to talk people off him because I really like him. I think he can still score well. He has scored well even in tougher matchups at times. But if we just go by the fixture difficulty and the price, I just think there's a few better options.
He has spent a little bit of time over the past few weeks, like I said, with an increasing volume of centre bounce opportunities. Now, Dangerfield and Guthrie, the club certainly still want to give them opportunities when they're back to full strength and fitness. Does that change some of your analysis if he stays in a more 50-50 split? Does that change for Geelong inside midfielders, or is it still just blanket in terms of that fixture run that you've alluded that it's not as favourable as we might have hoped?
If we look at Geelong for inside midfielders, they're like right in the middle of the pack, so as kind of neutral as it can be. So it's not a positive run, it's not a negative run. It's still the same thing. It doesn't really fill me with big confidence. I think he still could be quite good, and if he's your kind of D5, D6, I think you're still going to be very happy with him. I just think if you're trading him in at that price, I just think you could spend your money a little bit better.
Well, yeah, as you mentioned, Yeo's 60,000 cheaper. Sicily in a week's time is starting to, he's not getting back to the beast mode we know he can be, but we're starting to see him level out as an attainable price. And then there's a bunch of others just in and around that 500K in the back line that I think a lot of the community are considering this week, if they well and truly are hitting it.
Yeah, even say like a Whitfield and Blakey, I don't think they're going to score as well as Holmes, but they could be within a few points average for 80K less. That's kind of where I'm thinking.
Yeah, it's fair enough. There are a couple of really popular trade-ins this week. 14% of the community at time of recording are going into a Carl Warner. I'm not so sure that's the move. I understand why.
I'm not sure about that one.
I understand why, but no, I don't agree with it. 6.6% of the community are moving into a Dane Zorko. It's not chasing points. It's just chasing your tail in the forward premium that's probably got away from you. So again, at just that 570K marker, I understand why he's still a popular move. He dropped about 20K from his price point last week. So touch of value if you want to find the optimistic side of it. It's not really there. But then the third most popular trade in, and it's the player I want to ask you a bit about this week, is a Zach Merrett. 5% of coaches of the community are jumping in on him. He's priced at 577,600. Got a seasonal average of 117.5, and there's certainly been a great pick for most of the year. Hasn't dropped under 94 for the season. Hasn't given us the ceiling game yet that we know he's capable of. A season high of 136. Decent matchup this week, you would suggest, with so many West Coast players that are experienced in that midfield, either in doubt or are ruled out to play. Is it right that he's one of, if not, is the most popular traded in premium midfielder this week?
Yeah. I think trading in Merrett's a very good option. I've kind of, as we're going through the season, there was 8 mids I was really confident in, then a few fell off, it was 6. Now I've only got 4 mids and I'm kind of really confident that everyone kind of wants. I think everyone will want Bond.
Yep.
Everyone will want Butters. Butters and Sarong.
Okay. I was about to say, that's a hot take, Pig. I'm big on that one.
He's on my mind because I'm thinking about whether I trade him in.
Sure.
Sorry, I'll just start again. Bont, Sarong and Butters and then Merrett are the 4 that I think I have a lot of confidence in as being top 8 mids. Yeah. I think whoever your other 4 mids are, you could fill it out with guys like LDU or Goulden or Steele or Green, whoever it is. But those 4 I think are really good. Merrett, interesting. He's got 117 season average, but his last 5 average is 107. So he has dropped a bit. But all the midfielders are getting tagged right now. Tags are back in vogue. But Merrett has actually been the one that's pushing through and still scoring well. He scored 125 in his last game, even with a heavy Chincotta tag.
That's right.
Off the top of my head, he scored a 94 and I think a 109 when he got tagged by North and Adelaide earlier in the year. So, there's midfielders out there scoring 60. So the fact that Merrett's getting tagged and getting you low tons, I think he's pretty safe. I think he is a good trade in. I do think he has quite a few more tags in his season to come. Yeah, I
was just looking at that fixture.
Like especially if we even look at the last 5 rounds with leading into SuperCoach finals, there's a potential Windhager. Freo probably won't. Gold Coast maybe gets Rao. Sydney could get Jordan, Brisbane he could get Berry. So there are potential tags coming, but I don't like to avoid people because there might be a tag coming. Because what if there's not a tag coming? Like then they get off the chain and they score really well and they're a primo mid. So I wouldn't really let the potential tags affect me. If we look at just fixture in general, Essendon actually have the third easiest run for inside mids.
It's good on paper, isn't it? Yeah.
And, people get excited. We always talk about it in Dr. Supercoach Slack that Merrett has we call it like post-buy Merrett. He just goes on this run every single year, whereas
he does.
his post-buy is so much higher than his pre-buy every year.
Yep.
I'm not sure if it's possible that he'll go over 117 average post-buy, but you never know. If he keeps up that trend, maybe he does.
He's as good as anyone. Yeah.
If you look at the next 4 rounds, West Coast, that's going to be really nice. He's actually one of my top captain recommendations this week. Geelong next week, I dare say he'll make the video again.
Mm-hmm.
Collingwood's a little tough, but then Melbourne in round 18, Melbourne are actually the third easiest matchup at the moment, and I think they're going to get worse without Petrarca. So
I agree with that.
3 really easy games in the next 4 rounds for Merrett, so you might get a little sugar hit as well.
Yeah, and I'm not too worried about that Sydney matchup either. I think if Jordan's going anyone, it's probably more likely to be a Redmond or a Nick Martin type. He's shown, while he does tag the inside mids, he's shown much more of the propensity. It's the rebounder or the interceptor in defence. So unless Merrett's deployed into that rebound spot, which I don't think Essendon really need, given what they've developed in that spot, I'm not too concerned about that. I quite like the move of Merrett, as you mentioned. On paper, gosh, that fixture looks as good as any. And especially you need it when you're trading up to that near 600,000. Yes, he's not cheap and he's been good for a reason. But yeah, for me, if I'm spending anything over sort of that 550 marker this week as a midfield upgrade, gee whiz, I'm looking at Zach going, man, I could get that ceiling game. Every year in SuperCoach, he gives us 3, maybe even up to 4 or 5 kind of 150 plus games in a year, and even the odd 170 or 180. Like I said, he's only gone to 130, sort of is the highest score of the year so far. I think it's a 136. So, yeah, I'm feeling pretty confident. Yeah, I'm saying he's due. It might not be as early as this week, but I'm saying he's definitely due for at least 1 or 2 150s, and very comfortable with trading into him.
Yeah, I would definitely. I think he's a great trade-in target. He will get tagged, but he's shown he can push through it. I'd try and not let the tag affect you too much.
Yeah, I agree with that. 2 last midfielders I got to ask you. I know you want to ask me a question before we wrap up the episode, but another player people are looking at trading into their midfield. He's under that 550 marker that I've mentioned. So maybe that's my get out of jail free if I choose to trade into Walsh this week over Merrett. But Sam Walsh has been a really popular move this week, since obviously the early injury layoff and the early buy really put a line through coaches considering him early days. Flew out of the gate with that monster ceiling game. 166 upon his return was huge. Has had a few lower games since then, but nothing disastrous, like a season low of 85, priced at $548,800. And understandably, again, a popular trade this week in a number of parts of the community. What's your read on Walsh? Are you wanting to just go a little bit higher up to Merrett and go a little bit lower to the Greens, the Olivers, the Rosies, the whoever? Or do you still think there's some, I was about to make a pun, merit in going towards Walsh? What's your take?
Well, there's definitely some merit in Merrett, and I think there's a lot of merit in Walsh as well.
Yeah.
It's funny, at the start of the year, the Walsh hype was huge. People were saying like he's a 115 plus guy. I was kind of like really heavily putting the coolers on it and saying, no, please don't think that that's going to happen. I had him as kind of like a 108, 109 guy. And I mainly had that because of, Carlton have so many good midfielders. There's just so many points to go around. And he's kind of proved he is averaging a little bit over that now, but he's buoyed by those 2 massive games. So he's on track to kind of be around that. But kind of what I was saying with Kerno, Carlton had a really, really tough run heading into their bye. Like, if we even look at the teams, they played Adelaide, Giants, Collingwood, Sydney, Gold Coast, Port Adelaide, Essendon. Really tough matchups for inside midfielders. And now his run opens up, especially next 2 weeks, Geelong and then Richmond. Pretty much doesn't get better for inside midfielders, those 2 teams. If you look at his whole season remaining, they have the 5th best rating for inside midfielders. So just behind Essendon in terms of, rating. So Carlton have a really good run coming home. Walsh himself's interesting because he gets so many disposals, but his disposal efficiency has been quite poor. And then his score's getting buoyed by by a lot of tackles.
Yeah.
But he's only averaging like 2 marks a game, which is most of the gun midfielders average about 6.
Yeah, right.
Which is really funny to think that Sam Walsh is only averaging 2 when he's such a fitness freak.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what's going on there, but it does give me some, confidence that maybe if he puts it all together, he could be one of the best SuperCoach scorers in the game. Is it going to happen this year? I'm not certain, but I still think like he's got upside on his price right now because he's played those hard teams. His price has dropped. He's now going to go on a really, really easy run.
Yeah.
I think I would, if you had the cash, I would prefer Merrett but I would prefer Walsh than kind of any midfielder below him. Like if you can get him over, say, like, I don't know who's around the same price, like a Took or a Laird or a Steele or Dawson, I would rather Sam Walsh coming home.
Yeah, it's an interesting take. You're right. I think a lot of people will be fading him, unfortunately, because they'll be looking elsewhere, and like a Rouse 7,000 cheaper. Like you're not probably going, Rouse going to be 10 points per game better from here on in. So I understand why you've got him in the mix through there.
I wouldn't be surprised if Walsh scores more total points than Rowell for the rest of the year.
Yep. Well, based on the fixture you mentioned, like we could get the hit this next 2 weeks, that sort of 130, 140 with that fixture matchup. But yes, he's always a tag, quote unquote, risk, but man, you're going to just allow Cripps to run free. Are you worried about Chera's imminent return? He's still listed 1 week away from a hamstring. I know it's probably more an impact to a Matt Kennedy in terms of where he plays on the field. So I don't know if there's a huge correlation, but does that change any of the factoring in for you around Walsh or not really a variable?
Well, that's kind of just like my thoughts at the start of the year were that he was a 110 or just below 110 guy because like when Chera, Kennedy, Hewitt, Cripps and him are all healthy. So actually when he's playing without those guys, he could spike a little bit above it. So yeah, sure. I think Chera puts a little dampening on him, but it's probably, I think it's still like to a 109 kind of guy.
Yeah.
Nothing to worry about.
Getting what you pay for, really. And again, you mentioned this week is as good as it's going to get for him. And there's still no Chera. He's listed at the club's AFL injury list that he's still 1 week away.
Yep, okay.
So he won't come in this week, barring some kind of drastic healing powers that we would all like to send to Sam Taylor. If you know the injury that I'm alluding to, you know exactly why we're wishing him the best. That is for every male. Oh, it is. There's not laughing. It's not like the under-14s cricket where someone gets hit in the box and we laugh and then grimace. We are all grimacing for you, Sam. So we definitely wish you, as well as every other injured player in the AFL, all the best of luck. One last player I want to ask you about through the midfield. He's not cheap. He's now over 600,000. And for those that started this player, they're like, me too. Where was this in round 3, 4, 5? Some are still holding him, me. But it might be more indicative of what my team looks like for 2024. I'm talking about Luke Davies-Uniacke. His last 5 has been as good as any midfielder running around. 109, 152, 117, 114, 147. Now priced over 600,000. But any interest coaches probably had heading into the round might be just that little bit cooled with the news coming out of the club in the past 24, 48 hours, which is he's gone for an MRI. Nothing really prescriptive about what it's about at time of recording or any indication at time of recording about whether or not they found something, they didn't find something, anything like that. So I don't know if coaches are going to go there now based off that, but gee whiz, you talk about players that had big scoring runs at the back of the year. Merrett's one of them. LDU's another. That post by the past few years, he's been one of the best midfielders and was looking like that trend could keep continuing on in 2024.
Yeah, he's a tough one because he is over 600K now, whereas you could get Merrett and Walsh, as we talked about, for quite a bit cheaper. When we talk about fixtures, it's the single best fixture in the league. Carlton have the easiest run for North Melbourne have the easiest run for midfielders coming home. Hawthorn also have a really good run, but North Melbourne's the easiest. So the run coming home, I mean, you've just missed the West Coast game, which was a nice one too, but still, it's still the top. So he's got Melbourne this week, who, as we just said, I think are going to become a real kind of target team for our midfielders. I think they're about to struggle. He's got Bulldogs. He's got 3 hard ones, but then he comes home with Geelong, Richmond, West Coast, Bulldogs, Hawthorn. So he's got a really juicy run coming home. The injury niggles, like, has he been out surfing again? I know he had a surfing injury to end last year that kind of derailed his season. It's tough. I'm an owner and I've been through the hard times and I'm now being rewarded with the good times as a you. And, you know, LDU, he actually might be my vice captain this week. Like, that's how keen I am on him.
If he plays, yeah.
If he plays. But recommend people trading him in over Merrett and Walsh? I probably am not. Yeah. And I'm not sure if it's being a jaded, slightly burnt owner.
It is, but that's fine.
It's the price difference between the 3.
I think it's probably a combination of it all, isn't it?
Yeah.
Man, I could get Merrett for 60K cheaper. I could get Walsh for 70K cheaper. I could almost do a double upgrade if you really wanted to. And if you're not happy with the volume of quote unquote premiums on your field, Oliver, Green, Rosie. None of them are in form at the moment for a variety of different reasons. It's not about what has been, it's about what's about to come. And all have shown 105 to 110, in Oliver's case, 120, is well and truly in their history and legacy of scoring. And so it does start to get mentally hard to jump into a guy, despite the good fixture, despite the good form. Oh man, how do I justify that? So I understand that dilemma for coaches.
I think I would recommend Merrett out of those 3.
I think I would too. If you're almost spending over 500K for any midfielder upgrade this week, I'd be looking to find the way to get into Zach for a number of the reasons that you've mentioned. All right, we're going to wrap up the podcast in a minute, but I believe there's a defensive dilemma you want to put out there for us.
Well, not necessarily just defenders, but it's a 500K dilemma.
Okay.
And let's make it a little bit more like, let's say 510, so that we can include a couple of juicy guys. So,
thanks so much.
there are a lot of coaches that are finishing their team this week.
Yes.
But with that, say maybe they've done an upgrade or this is their last upgrade, and let's say they've only got 510K. Okay. There's 6 names I've kind of looked at that I would identify in that range.
Okay.
And there are a few I haven't included. Like, I haven't included Kerno, but we've already talked about him, and I've already said I think he's a really good option. And like, you could probably look at a lot of different positions with the DPP swing. So I just want your quick thoughts, maybe a little quick thought on each player, but then if you had to pick one.
Okay.
Connor Rosie. What are your thoughts on Connor?
Happy to get him, but I wouldn't want him as my M8 for the rest of the season.
Okay, that was going to be one of my questions, because there are some people that might have to rely on him on field. Would you rather say the next bloke, Clayton Oliver?
I would prefer neither, if I'm really honest with you.
That's all. I've got 4 options still covered.
That's great. But I don't hate either. And while we kind of talked about you want all your value of players on field as best you can, that's a very idealistic place to be, which is all where we want to be. But some coaches are looking at an Oliver and a Rosie as M8 going, this is as good as I can get, or I'm stuck with Frege, Revel, Clark on field. And in that instance, I say go and get them with happiness. But in ideal circumstance, you probably don't want either if you're contending deep in leagues or ranks.
Well, I am asking you this question because I am also in this position, because I've missed a lot of the good cash cows in the Sam Darcys and the Dempseys and the Meeks and whatnot. So I am someone that has to skimp on my 22nd guy. So and I know there's quite a few in that boat. The third option that I identified that could be an option is Lachie Whitfield.
Yep, I got no problem with Lachie Whitfield. I think his form of late at the moment is as good as anyone. Like, he's got a 134 against Port, who aren't the easiest of matchups. They gift a lot of behinds. But then before that, I think he's got 4 tons in the previous 5 games. So to me, I'm pretty happy to get into Lachie Whitfield. He might not be the best option at that price point for every team, but to me, I'm pretty happy with that. I think he's dropped about a little bit of cash from his starting
Yeah,
price. So
the thing with Whitfield, I think he's going to cop the James Jordan tag this week, who
yes.
kept him to a 50 last time they met. But
Yeah, you're not
after
doing it
that,
this week, are you?
yeah, which
Yeah.
after that, I think he's going to be really good.
Yep.
Nick Blakey, any interest in Nick Blakey from you?
None whatsoever. No,
Yep.
just the volume of ceiling games this year. When you put him and a Whitfield side by side again, if it's this week, I'm probably backing in him against the Giants as opposed to a Whitfield. But last week he comes off a 65. And then before that, the kind of previous weeks, what are we looking at? 99, a 120, a 78, a 131, a 43. This is the time of year, like a 40 or a 60 in either a close league matchup or in a rankings battle for the top 100,000, top 10, whatever you're pushing for. Gosh, players with that sort of basement for really no good reason. Some of those aren't tag games. I get a bit concerned off.
Yeah, I think the floor's scary. Christian Salem's an interesting one. Really good kind of last 3 rounds. People are hoping he gets the Christian Petrarca CBAs.
Yep.
I think he's only
I'm all for it.
430K off the top of my head, something like that.
Yep. Yeah, he's going 107 in the last 3. Yeah, a lot of interest for me there. And again, part of that's twofold. One is, people that are trying to skimp and make some money, work for them a little bit. Got DPP, which, as you've alluded to throughout this podcast, how important that is for our trade capital that we could invest somewhere else or save somewhere else. And then he showed early in the season, as well as through the preseason, he can play that centre bounce midfield role, and they like to get the ball in his hands. And he tackles. If he can start getting some more score involvements, kicking into his SuperCoach scoring, like that interests me a heck of a lot. What concerns me is I don't trust him to play 6 games in a row. That's the thing.
Shown an injury prone.
Just concerns me. But the thing is, you're not paying for a Yeo type over 500,000 with a similar injury concern. You're paying in the mid to low 400s. So your risk profile, I would say, is de-escalated a little bit because of it.
Yep. And then the final one is Luke Jackson. And he's in here, especially for those with, say, the Livingston at R3 for the loop, and he might be able to cover if it's a Gawn or a English or a Grundy, whoever you've got, like a 1-week concussion, he might be able to come on and save your donut. How highly do you value that cover? Because he's probably not quite scoring as high as we want.
No.
Would you pay up for that flexibility?
I wouldn't be paying for the flexibility alone. I think you'd be also paying because you're not really thrilled with what your F5 and F6 look like. Outside of Heaney, Flanders, Zorko, and you could probably start to consider, maybe 1 or 2 others into that space.
Yeah, Fisher and Ranken are probably the next 2. But
and even then Fisher, like if McKerch is back this week, this monopoly he's got might be gone. So Rankin's the only other one. They're the 4 I go happy to have. And then F5 and F6, it's like, well, Maud's shown he can hit 130s and he can hit 70s. Powell and McRae, who people still have rolling through there, nervousness. So I wouldn't be trading up for Jackson just for the flexibility. The justification I'd have would be its flexibility, and he can still go 110 without having the lion's share of the ruck. And if history repeats itself, where Darcy probably misses a game or 2 over the back half of the year, and I think Frio's midfield almost looks better with him at full flight through the midfield unit in terms of just the versatility it allows. I don't know if everyone's in the luxury to, as you mentioned, pay up over 500K for it, but it can't just be the cover of a week that might happen. It's got to be my primary F5, F6, and the cover is an aided bonus, not the leading driver.
I guess the point I took away from there is whoever else you're getting at F6 might be just as poor.
Yeah, well, that's true. And is it worth the trade? Fisher's been great, but up until when people jumped off him when he was put as the sub, we were all going, he's a mid-70s guy when he's got this role share with a Sheasel, with a McKercher, with a whoever. It wouldn't shock me. I'll happily keep Fisher on field for as long as McKercher and or Sheasel aren't both jumping back there. But the Lions' share monopoly is gone, potentially as early as this week, which does have me a little concerned about Fisher.
All right. That's the thoughts on, I guess, the 5-10-ish and down guys that people might be rounding out their team on. So pick one.
I don't like it.
Rosie, Clary, Whitfield, Blakey, Jackson, Salem.
If it's about who I think is going to score the most from now to the end of the year and taking positional stuff out of the mix.
Yep, total points.
For me, I'm going for Lockie Whitfield.
Yeah. There we
go.
But
this week's going to hurt. This week's going to hurt.
Yeah, you've got to be ready for that.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it this week, but if it's about now to the end of the year, it's that. If positional scarcity is your driver, not who scores the most, Jackson's the most valuable. He's the most irreplaceable. And if you're just like, man, Oliver, Whitfield, Green, they all could score. Rosie could all score within 5 points of each other. So that's why I'd probably devalue why I'd trade into those guys and kind of elevate the other options. So Jackson, the most valuable, but I'll go Whitfield as the total point scorer because I'm a sucker for Lockie. I can't help myself. Yeah.
Great.
You? I'm not letting you off the hook. Who are you going?
At this is my predicament, and I think at the moment I've got Luke Jackson in.
Yep.
And that is because I'm down to 4 trades, and like the ruck coverage he provides is nice with only 4 trades left. Yep. A little bit of security. It's probably not the aggressive, the most points one, but if English misses a week, he could just make up 80 points there.
It becomes very, very important for that week too.
Honestly, I've tossed this up so many times. I don't mind Rosie. I actually think he could be a 105 guy coming home for a really cheap price, but yeah, I'll probably won't make my decision till I hit panic stations at the end.
I think the benefit of a Rosie in at that kind of 400, rounding it at 420,000 is that extra 80K of a Jackson or a Whitfield. Does that aid an additional move you could make this week or next? And if it's now a totality approach rather than just a player versus points, then I'm down for it. For me, I don't want Rosie in my completed midfield if I can avoid it, but I don't hate it if cash is the driver and trade restriction is the driver. I don't hate it. What was he going, like 108, 109 pre-injury?
Yeah, I think you nailed it.
And so if he can get back to that, and it's a big if, then we're away. And it's one of the value buys of the year. So, don't hate it.
Great. You've given me more to think about.
Oh, no, I didn't help you at all, did I? That's all right. Hey, mate, always a pleasure. Love talking about SuperCoach with you. You've been an absolute star in the community, not just throughout this season, but through the preseason and into the back half of 2023. Where can we get in touch with you across social media for both you and the Dr. SuperCoach boys?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at pig_DRSC. The main Dr. SuperCoach Twitter is at Dr_SC. But then also we've got a bit going on our YouTube channel, including like our weekly reviews posted there, but also my captain's videos, which have been going pretty well this year. JB also does a Thursday night live stream on Twitch. He kind of posts that on Twitter, and then you can link to Twitch, and he kind of gives his impressions of the teams and tries to pick who he thinks is going to be the sub and has a bit of fun there with that. So yeah, that's a few things we got going on at the moment, and also like just on Spotify, our weekly recap that we do, just recapping the games that are gone. So we're across a few things. And you people can join your Patreon as well, I believe. Yep, there's a Patreon, Patreon Dr. SuperCoach. We've got there's different tiers there, but the entry level one is access to our Slack, which is a big group chat with I think there's about 650 like-minded SuperCoach individuals, so you can get a lot of advice, run your trades by people. We do a lot of other fun stuff in there, like we've got a running club, a book club, all this sort of stuff. So it's a lot of fun, but SuperCoach is the thing that brings us all together. So absolutely, a lot of like-minded people in there, if that's something that interests people. My advice for anyone that's in there, as someone that spent some time in that Slack channel, turn notifications off at certain point of time. Because if you have a significant other,
they will separate you from your device as quickly as they possibly could. So, mate, you and the guys at Dr. Supercoach have been absolute legends to the community for a long period of time. If you missed any of those details of where you can find, follow, or get involved with Pig Mentality or any of the other Dr. Supercoach guys, I've got the details for you in the description of this episode. So wherever you're checking it out, just simply click on the description. Make sure you do that. These boys have been doing some phenomenal work for the community here in Supercoach for a long period of time, and are well worth not just a listen or a follow, but for you jumping in a Patreon. And again, turn notifications off on the Slack. It will make you feel better. But gosh, it's a lot of fun to watch. If you want to go and check out this episode on YouTube, it is there. You can go and check us out. You can actually see one of the Dr. Supercoach beanies and t-shirts as well that Pig Mentality is rocking out. So you can make sure, if you're liking the look of those, I've got the details of their store in the description of this episode. But if you're watching this on YouTube and you haven't subscribed, good news is it's a click of a button. It takes you 2 seconds. You can do it right now. And it's just a nice, simple, easy way to make sure that when videos drop from us here at the Coaches Panel, they pop up in your feed. The best way, though, is to turn the notifications on so that as soon as we drop a new episode, whether it be a strategy roundtable or anything else we bring you during the season and pre-seasons, you can make sure you check that out. These are also available as an audio podcast. Wherever you get your podcasts from, you can go and check this bad boy out. Give it a 5-star rating, as well as subscribe and a follow. And if you happen to be on Apple Podcasts, give it a nice rating review as well as your 5 stars. And between now and the end of the year, we've committed that every rating review that drops, we'll read it out on a coming podcast episode. So if you want to shout out, smack talk, or whatever it is you'd like to put in there, feel free to put it in there. Just keep it PG and positive would be the optimistic part of me. And of course, much like the guys at Dr. Supercoach, we've also got a Patreon. We'd love for you to support them as well as us. There are tiers you can get involved with, a bunch of different rewards, a ton of additional podcast and video episodes, as well as a bunch of other rewards. All the details for that, as well as everything else you can do from the Coaches Panel, found in the description of this episode. Hey, good luck this week. It's the final week of buys, and thank the goodness for that. We hope it goes well for you. I hope the downgrade trades you make are players that somehow score something well enough to get on field in your best 18. I hope your VC score nails it early in the round, so you're not stuck on Saturday night figuring out what you're going to do with your captains. And we can't wait to be chatting with you next week about all things Supercoach.